Back at E3 2019, Nintendo made the announcement that Banjo-Kazooie will be joining the Super Smash Bros. Roster this fall. This moment in video game history is important for a few reasons. Despite the large roster, this is the first playable Smash Bros. Character that didn't originate from a Japanese developer. As mentioned in my last video, Rare was bought out by Microsoft from Nintendo in the early 2000s, and with the studio, their IPs. Banjo-Kazooie was one of them. To see the bear and the bird on a Nintendo platform, much less a Microsoft representative, is something to be surprised about. This begs a few questions. Why was Banjo-Kazooie such a big deal? As a kid that grew up playing Donkey Kong 64 first, what made Banjo-Kazooie stand out? After all these years, is it still fun to play as it was back in 1997? Let's find out. For this video, I'll be focusing only on the first game in the series. No Banjo-Tooie, no Nuts and Bolts, not even the spin-off games. Just Banjo-Kazooie. Plus, I'll be putting this under the perspective of someone who has played Donkey Kong 64 first, because that's the mindset I had while playing Banjo. Considering that both games are Rare platforms, I thought it would be fair to compare the two. That said, this video is not about which game is better than the other, but to better understand why reactions like these were warranted. To get us started, let's talk about the game's story. It's as simple as it gets. A witch named Gruntilda kidnapped a girl bear named Tootie in order to become beautiful. It's up to Banjo and his friend Kazooie to rescue Banjo's sister while traversing through various worlds in the game. Now, we've heard this classic story 1,000 times in the past, not just in video games, but in a majority of entertainment media. A story about rescuing the damsel in distress. Now, I'm not making the claim that the game's story is terrible, but I would rather play a game where the girl saves herself for once. Though, that's not to say that Donkey Kong 64's story is original. In that game, Donkey Kong and his friends must recover all the golden bananas and defeat King K. Rool while traversing the different worlds, which was the plot for the Donkey Kong Country games. So what makes this game's story stand out from the rest? Honestly, everything else that surrounds Banjo-Kazooie. The characters, the worlds, the music, all of it. Charming is the best way to describe Banjo-Kazooie. I can name several characters that stuck out to me while playing. There's Bottles, who acts as the tutorial character, Gruntilda the Witch, who constantly speaks in rhyme, and Mumbo Jumbo, a shaman that aids the bear and bird. These characters and more have quirks and personalities that stand out from each other. This is better explained with the game's dialogue. Take a listen.
Up, gum, yo, up, and go, up, yo, gum, and go, up, go, gum, and yo, up, and yo. Go, gum, yo, up, gum, go, and go, up, go, and go, yo, go, and go, gum, and.
Each character has a sound effect that suits their personality. What does Donkey Kong 64 have? Outside of the Kongs and King K. Rool, not much. There's the llama from Angry Aztec, the gatekeepers, and that's it. Sure, they have sound effects, but they aren't incorporated into their dialogue. The conclusion I'm making is that Donkey Kong 64 doesn't make an effort into making all their characters stand out from each other the way Banjo-Kazooie does. After replaying both games in preparation for this video, I believe I found a possible reason why that's the case, and the answer can be found in each game's different worlds. Let's take each of the starting worlds as examples. No, I'm not talking about Spiral Mountain, I'm talking about Mumbo's Mountain, the first world the protagonists visit. In this world, there are a variety of enemies such as grublins, tickers, a bull, and the world's boss, Conga. In the next world, Treasure Trove Cove, we see crabs, treasure chests, mines, and a
giant enemy crab.
All in all, each world's inhabitants are themed after their respective area. What about DK64's Jungle Japes? Well, there's Naughties, Kasplats, and Zingers. As for Angry Aztec, there's the Zingers, again, Critters, and Claptraps. The enemies are fine. They have appeared in prior Donkey Kong games, but they're just a part of King K. Rool's group. They aren't native to the world they are in. Banjo-Kazooie has enemies that belong to their world, making them feel lived in and believable. Sure, DK64's worlds may be expansive, but I would rather play through a small, constrained, and fun area than a large, detailed, but somewhat shallow world. Wouldn't be the first time I've done it. The music is simply fantastic. Much like the work done in DK64, Banjo-Kazooie's musical score was composed by Grant Kirkhope. I'm certain this doesn't need to be said, but he has done a tremendous job bringing the world of Banjo-Kazooie to life. This might seem off topic, but there's a point to all this, so bear with me. I mentioned previously that Killer Instinct soundtrack during gameplay depends on each fighter's actions. This is something I would like to call dynamic music, where the music changes based on player input. There's something similar to this in Banjo-Kazooie, but it's dependent on where the protagonists are in the world. For example, listen to the transition between different themes in these scenes. In my entire playthrough, I had a lot of trouble picking out a favorite as they are all well done. If I had to choose, however, it would have to be the theme for Treasure Trove Cove. In my last video, I mentioned that Donkey Kong 64 became tedious with its item collecting. Judging by how critical I was, the same could be assumed with Banjo-Kazooie, right? Well, not exactly. Sure, there are a lot of items to collect like musical notes, extra lives, red and golden feathers, eggs, honeycombs, and puzzle pieces, but there's a difference between Donkey Kong 64's collectibles and Banjo-Kazooie's. There is little to no backtracking involved, and you don't need to constantly switch between characters and forms in order to obtain more jiggies and music notes. It's possible to 100% a single level on the first visit. In Donkey Kong 64, on the other hand, you would need to come back to the same level repeatedly with different Kongs in order to 100% a single world. You can't even access some areas until you unlock a specific Kong. This is the kind of padding that I've come to dislike. Nearly every collectible in the game is a requirement in order to progress through the game. What happens when you manage to collect every single item in DK64? Well, you get this.
Next.
Yay! In Banjo-Kazooie, you get hints about secret items you can look out for. It gives you a reason to play the game once again. Speaking of which, you may have noticed throughout the video that I'm playing the Xbox 360 version of Banjo-Kazooie. Why am I not playing the N64 version? Well, the short answer is because it's the only version I have. The longer version is because it's arguably the definitive edition. The Xbox 360 version has modernized controls, HD support, and a feature that was omitted from the N64 version, Stop and Swap. Originally, Rare wanted to implement a feature where it would reward players for playing Rare games. This was scrapped due to the hardware limitations of the N64. Rare visited this idea again and finally implemented this feature between the Banjo-Kazooie games. The secret items I mentioned earlier unlock special features for the Xbox 360 version of Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Despite Banjo-Kazooie being a linear experience, it breathes new life through the implementation of Stop and Swap, offering more reasons to return to the game. Before playing Banjo-Kazooie, I was under the impression that I wouldn't like this game as much for several reasons. I thought I was a bit too old to play games like this again, and even if that wasn't the case, I would be harshly comparing this to Donkey Kong 64. That statement cannot be further from the truth. This is a game that anyone can play, whether you're young or old. Banjo-Kazooie is the definition of a timeless classic, within the same league of Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. Immediately after finishing Banjo-Kazooie, I fired up Banjo-Tooie and became a fan of the series. There's something magical about Banjo-Kazooie that Rare created, something that hasn't been replicated since. DK64 had its moments, but in comparison to Banjo-Kazooie, it felt like a step backwards. As a kid, Donkey Kong 64 was my go-to Rare game. While it's still a game I've appreciated despite my bashing, I've learned to love the adventures of the bear and bird just as much. With this in mind, it's easy to understand why people get so excited over the announcement of Banjo-Kazooie in Smash Ultimate. It's a franchise that has resonated with people for so long. To see it in a spotlight again after over a decade of absence, it feels like visiting an old friend. I may have been late to the game, but I'm glad that I played Banjo-Kazooie years later. I hope that this moment in gaming history would mean the continuing adventures of the bear and bird. But what do you think? What is it about Banjo-Kazooie you enjoy? Are you excited for the duo to be a part of the Smash Ultimate roster? Leave your response in the comments below. Thank you for tuning into my video. Until then, this has been Opez Gaming, signing out.